Okay, so because I'm answering a question with this lesson here, and it really is one of the more, how do you want to say, esoteric things that goes around in the martial arts, and that is breaking balance. First of all, anybody who's ever grappled, done jujitsu, Western wrestling, any kind of grappling, or even, some of the internal arts like Tai Chi, everybody's aware of the importance of balance and taking people's balance and also using leverage. So this is not rocket science, but people make it harder than it has to be, and they kind of fetishize it. And so you don't want to fetishize it. So in Warrior Flow, when we're dealing with people's balance, we give people an appreciation for balance. In other words, if I'm moving here with my Kaishuku Jack, every human being has the ability to have a sense of balance, even if they're not consciously aware of it. Otherwise, how do you learn how to walk? Okay, so walking is one of the hardest skills we do as humans, at least one of the hardest by far, because nobody really teaches you how to walk. You got to kind of figure it out on your own. After you scrape your knees up enough times, you're like, okay, forget that noise, and then you figure it out. So when we're talking about breaking balance, and I like that term. This is something that Grandmaster Perkins used to always talk about. We're not talking about winding up and pushing and that kind of thing. And the reason is, we'll move over here away from this. If I push Jack, okay, now he's pissed off. He's going to come back. He's going to start windmilling on me. So I don't want to do that. So what we do in Warrior Flow is we only practice learning how to break a person's balance, not necessarily to push them away, but learn to break a person's balance in a microsecond to set them up to get crushed. Everything we do is all about crushing the bad guys, right? So a way in which I usually start people off in practicing it is I have one person stand, I'll just demonstrate this first, with 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, because it just gives you a little more stability and leverage to do this. And then what I do is, in the beginning, I catch a person right up underneath, the pecs. And then I push inward and lift up just a little bit, because I don't want them to sink their center of gravity. And then I push them with no more force than that. So I get underneath, I lift, and then I push. I get underneath a little more into the camera. I get underneath, I lift, and then there's a push. As you get better at this, then over here, then it becomes one motion, one fluid motion. In other words, like all skills, as I always talk about skill development, no skill, no technique is one thing. It's actually a series of skills or techniques seamlessly stitched together. So I position myself, I uplift to kind of break the root a little bit, and then I push away. That's all I'm doing. So if Jack comes in, he puts 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, just to keep consistency. He lifts just a little bit, so I can't drop my center of gravity quickly, and he just pushes me away. And you can actually feel this for yourself when you do this to a person. It's kind of like, you got to move a refrigerator, and so what you do is, instead of sliding on the floor and scraping the dog on the floor, you kind of tip it back on the edge, and then you can kind of manipulate it easier because now you got it on the edge of balance. So that's all that's happening here. So as he lifts up, he lifts, and then he gives me a little push. And off I go. The reason we practice that way is to train a person to get used to being able to do that, but also to remove the mystery, like this is hard. One of the things that we do also is a person is moving toward me. And so instead of me, winding up and doing a push, you're moving toward me, I catch them as they're moving. And before they're able to put 1 foot down, or as they're trying to transition from one root point to the next, or 1 foot to the next, or one balance point to the next, however you want to define it, I change the vector of their movement. And the reason I change the vector of their movement is because once they start moving and I change the vector, it's just much easier to push them. I don't need a lot of force. I don't need to be stronger than them. I just need to position my body in the right position to be able to do it. And because all human movement has kind of an arcing motion to it anyway, even if he's moving here, he's moving, and I go like that. Now, it looks like BS magic, but it's not. All it is I'm catching his momentum. I'm feeling him trying to make the transition, And then before he can place his foot down, I'm just adding enough energy to it to change the vector of his motion. You know, it's kind of like if you've ever been like Fleet Week, New York, you know, and you see the aircraft carriers come in, you know, here's this thing displacing 100,000 tons in the water, yet being manipulated and maneuvered by a bunch of tugboats. And when you look over the side, because I've done a couple of Fleet Weeks, you look over the side, you see the tugboat, you're like, this is crazy. But as long as there's a little bit of momentum of that aircraft carrier, they could position that thing right into the pier, no problem. So it's the same physics going on. Now, how does that apply to a real situation? Because in a real fight, I'm not trying to sit here and, you know, and do all kinds of Kung Fu Panda stuff, even though I'm all about the Kung Fu Panda movies. But what I'm doing is I'm developing that timing, that technique. And the reason is, it's a very simple thing. If I can touch you and feel where your center is, and I can uproot you just enough and push you, then if I can touch you, I can also hit you. And because it's generally the same muscles and almost the same motion when I hit people, whether I'm even sending a straight fist, right? If I can do this, come in, I could do that. I'm doing the same thing. And there are different ways in which I hit people and break balance. But my point is, if I'm here and Jack's fist is on me and he uproots and hits with just a little upward strike, you know, he can easily take my balance and do that. And so instead of just pushing people, we hit people like that. And you can practice this skill. I don't recommend full tilt because you like, you know, you won't have training partners if you keep beating the crap out of each other. But even when I'm moving with someone, because I can still feel relatively where their center of gravity is, I can then practice hitting, feeling where their center is, because all human beings have this ability to feel a person's center. You know, for example, you see a mother. I just saw a woman, I was at the store earlier, and she's carrying a baby, you know, and as she's trying to get to the door, you know, the kid is squirming. And yet she's got complete control over the kid, even though the kid's squirming. Why? She can feel them moving, but she can also feel where the center of gravity is, where she always is positioning herself to make sure that the kid doesn't, you know, fall out of her arms. And she opens the door. I was a little too far away to help her open the door, so I'm just saying I wasn't, you know, being a jerk and ungentlemanly, you know, because my wife would be all over me. But, so my point is, as we're doing this, we don't, you know, fetishize this. We don't spend a lot of time on this. You know, once people get the idea, it's just a thing we do. And all the skills within Warrior Flow, we're all about people learning how to do a skill, absorbing it to a level of basic mastery, whether it takes 5 years, 5 months, 5 minutes. Most of the stuff we teach, it doesn't take long because we're not trying to make people do things that the body doesn't do anyway. And then from there, if I'm working with Jack, and let's say he wants to penetrate me in a way to take balance as well, the reason why you would do that, number one, because you want to crush them and not give them a chance to get back in the fight, but also too, by hitting them like that, it makes it hard for them to retaliate because they need kind of their balance. And even if they throw a strike, you know, unless they hit you in the eye or something, it's very hard when you don't have balance or stability to be able to strike with power. I'm not saying it's impossible, it's just hard to do. So in everything we do, because we're always controlling our own equilibrium, we're always trying to hit people in a way to disrupt their body and penetrate their center. You know, me, I'm all about, you know, like the Predator, you know, punching a hole in people and pulling their spine out. I mean, it's not possible, but I can assure you, it won't be for lack of trying, you know what I'm saying? And so as we're doing this stuff, we don't go whoring after this stuff and like, all we want to do is sit around and play sumo games and push people, ooh, I got you, and all this other nonsense that I see people doing. Because it's not realistic. You know, anyone who's ever wrestled, you know, even if you never formally were trained in grappling, you know, you have an innate ability to do this. I mean, when you're a little kid and you used to wrestle with your friends or your brothers or whatever, this is stuff you could do because we all have this natural feel, this natural ability. So that's how we do it in Warrior Flow. We don't get wrapped around the axle. We don't, you know, we train people to do it so they can get a feel for it, so they know they can hit people with power. But also, we use it in a way, whereas if I can take your balance, this is where I start winding up like Sugar Ray and punching people so hard. They're going to want to die just so I'll just stop hitting them. We use it as a means to set people up, to crush them. We don't get wrapped around the axle over, okay, ooh, now I'm going to control your balance. No, forget that nonsense. I'm here. I'm going to control your balance for that microsecond. I'm going to hit you so hard. You know, like I said, you know, you're going to be talking to long lost loved ones, which is not a good look, right? Now, one of the things I want to cover real quick, because I was asked a question. I've talked about how we break balance, uprooting people. I also talked about how I break balance by changing the vector once a person starts moving. And Grandmaster Perkins was the master of that stuff. And what he would do is, person's moving toward, and he would get them to start moving and trying to adjust, and then he would break your balance, because once he used deception to get you to move a certain way, or to get you to move or flinch, every movement you make subsequent to that becomes predictable. And then it just makes it easy to catch you, take balance. And if he can push you off balance, he can hit you off balance. It's just that simple. Brilliant stuff. The other thing is, and I always like this, and I learned this from him, is taking people's balance where you don't push them back, but you stick them to the ground. This is what I'm talking about. And what he would do is, I just turn Jack this way. I won't hit him hard, because, you know, otherwise, you know, he might return the favor, you know. And what I do is, and you've seen Grandmaster Perkins do this if you watch some of the videos, where he would hit a person and he would hit them down. I'm going to exaggerate this, you can see what I'm doing. And his fist would hit you flat. Now, he wouldn't hit you in the head like this, because then, like I said, he starts running out of students. And he's got this like 45-degree angle. And what happens is, when you hit a person like that, not only do I take you off balance, but his body naturally wants to resist. And so the direction he needs to step, unfortunately, is where all the force went down on his leg. So you want to lift that leg up. Go lift the leg up. You really can't, because then I hit you again. And the reason is because you're hitting them in a direction where your center of gravity, say your center of gravity is at the top of my fingers. As the center of gravity gets knocked out of alignment with your base or your root, what happens is your body wants to fall. But if the leg you're balanced on is here, and you're doing this, naturally your body resists in most cases, because you don't want to fall. You know, it's like people, when you fall and you trip and you put your hand out, some people say, oh, no, never put your arm out. Well, okay, yeah, I get that. But the reason people do it is why? Because it's better than falling on your head.
You almost feel paralyzed.
Yeah. So when I do this with people, I'm always careful, you know, because I'm also not trying to, like, you know, give anybody like spinal compression unless, you know, they deserve spinal compression. And I'm here and I'm just going to hit them with all my might on this angle, stick them to the ground, and I'm going to end up with the coup de grace, and I'm just going to elbow them so hard on the side of the head that, you know, should they survive it, they may not want to live, you know, get that tube in their neck, that kind of thing. So as you're doing this, like, so Jack says he's hitting me here, and you can, and this is how I usually get people to do it. I don't let them hit me, because it just hurts. I let them place it there, and then he can automatically feel where my center is, and just a little more force. And right there, you can feel how now my legs are pushing back. When you hit them, even at speed, you can actually feel them do this, and then they can't move, and then you finish them off, and you send them off to the afterlife to meet with their ancestors and maybe even some people they owed some money before they passed away. So I hope, as I talked about balance and how we view balance, and I'm not saying we don't do exercises to improve balance, but for us, balance is all about controlling our own equilibrium better than another person can control theirs. You see this in real fights all the time, where a lot of times the person who loses the fight is not necessarily because they got hit first, but because they lost control of their body or they lost their balance, and then everybody dog piles on them, unless, you know, a bunch of women fighting in freaking Walmart, and you know, then that's a different thing, or McDonald's. I don't know what's up with that. So when I'm doing this stuff, hitting on these angles, even if I want to hit here, I'm not just hitting here in the ribs. I'm going to hit, lift, boom, send you off to the afterlife. So hopefully this answers a lot of questions.